So Tia, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us today. So Tia, by way of introduction, you are currently the Director of IT, Data and Information Services for Gallagher. And as I think most people will know, Gallagher, obviously a major insurance, risk management consulting company, founded in 1927, I believe, so over 100 years old and sort of over 49,000 employees worldwide. So clearly a very established and reputable insurance company. But I've really been looking forward to today because I know insurance is an industry. I find it a very fascinating world because I always feel it's a little bit of a dichotomy in many ways, insofar as it's an industry kind of steeped in heritage, in tradition, yet in the same breath, you know, from a tech and data perspective, there's a lot of really interesting work being done, and a lot of kind of real potential, I guess, to transform the industry through tech and data and creating the right kind of data-driven culture, which you and I have spoken about before. So yeah, I guess it's a bit of a spectrum, I suppose, isn't it? On one end of the spectrum, you've got companies which know they need to be a bit more data driven, but not really done a huge amount with it yet. And then the other end of the spectrum are companies that are, you know, to all intents and purposes, I guess, tech companies, just happen to sell insurance. So really interested to sort of understand a bit about your approach and where Gallagher is on that journey. But before we go into that, it'd be lovely to just hear a little bit more about you. So if you'd be so kind, you know, let us know how you got into tech in the first place, and yeah, give us a little bit of a walkthrough of your career journey to date.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I work at Gallagher now, but it's probably been maybe 20-year journey to kind of get to where I am. Mm-hmm. So I went to university and I did aeronautical engineering. And at the time that I left, it was just around the time of 9/11. And it wasn't really a time when anyone was hiring aeronautical engineers. You know, the travel industry collapsed. No one wanted to go on planes. So I was like, I really need to retrain. And so I went off, I did another degree, and then came out, and I ended up taking a job in for Experian, working in their software house. And I started off in testing. And then after that, I did a variety of different roles across a number of different IT professions. So I started with testing, did a little bit of software development and data warehousing. And, you know, at that time, you know, 20 years back, IT wasn't quite as rigid as it is now in terms of this profession, that profession. Yeah. And about, I'd say 10, 12 years ago, I ended up in the data warehousing space. And I've been there ever since, kind of specializing more into analytics. So when I started at Experian, we did predictive analytics on fraud. And that's where I started. And that's sort of where my career's grown out of since. During that 20-year period, I've done some consultancy work. I've done work across the public sector, working my way up through the NHS. And I've done telecoms. And now I'm in insurance, which is where I find myself at Gallagher.
Fair enough. Well, thank you very much for that. So was it always a kind of a natural choice for you to, what was it about technology in the first place that really appealed to you, I guess, as a career?
I think I was always interested in, you know, from quite a young age in breaking stuff and then putting it back together. Whether that was physical, you know, engineering parts, or whether that was trying to do things digitally, you know, with what primitive technology we had back in the 90s. But certainly we were quite early adopters in my household of getting a computer. My parents had no idea what to do with it. But I was always trying to figure things out and have a play.
What was the first computer? Do you remember?
Oh, gosh. I remember that my dad brought one home because they were giving them away from his office.
Oh, right. Wow.
You know, having a bit of a clear out. No, it sounds way more glamorous than it was. Oh, right. It came and it was a green screen job. And then he brought one back about a couple of months later, and it was even older with an orange screen.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wow, this is, and this, you know, they brought home floppy disks and they were like a foot, you know, a foot by a foot. Yeah. They were enormous. And so that was kind of the very beginnings. But, you know, if I think back to kind of the school days and, you know, BBC computers and all that kind of stuff, that was sort of, everyone else was off in the library or playing with stuff. And I was sat there trying to get things to work with little robots. And I think that was where my interests were. But I, you know, at a young age, you don't necessarily know what a career looks like. You're just exploring and figuring things out. And so I was always quite interested in that space. And then I fell into women in STEM programs quite early, sort of 16, 17. and they gave me more of a path of, and considered this and considered that.
Okay.
And that led me to where I am now. And I'm still quite active in the women in STEM space,
Brilliant.
coaching and mentoring, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, it's something I'm really passionate about because obviously in the world of recruitment, it's something certainly in tech recruitment, we encounter on a daily basis, this sort of disparity in difference in sort of gender bias within tech. And obviously as a dad of 2 daughters myself, it's something I'm really passionate about as well. The STEM sort of associations that you are involved with, were they within school? Were they outside of school, or were
they were outside? So I was involved with 2. One was, and I presume both of them are now defunct because STEM has changed quite significantly, and now technologies, it's a standalone space. But I was involved into Women in Science and Engineering, and another one that looked after, or called Insight, which looked after engineering and specifically physics type stuff. And they did all kinds of stuff like university long weekends and kind of gave you an experience there where you go do an immersive 3 or 4 days at a university, figure out what their engineering teams did, figure out what their computing labs were like, do mini hackathons. There was all kinds of stuff that they would send you off to do. And it was all very interesting, and I think back then that was quite groundbreaking. Now we know there's a lot of women in STEM initiatives, but then that was like a really new thing. So it was certainly formative.
Yeah, I bet. And have you always, since coming into technology, felt you were kind of wedded to it and ever thought about deviating away from it, or did you always feel this was home for you and kind of where you'd want to continue growing your career?
Yeah, I've definitely always thought that this was where my home is. I've always considered my career to be quite organic. Opportunities come up that you can't ever foresee. And so when a good one comes up, I'm always curious. And so my career has taken a rather unusual path compared to some. I think many people sort of pick a profession and they go up and up and up and up and up each of the ranks. I've sort of sidestepped and jigged about, but in some cases, I think it's an interesting path to take. It's a bit of an all-rounder, and you get insight into all kinds of different areas. And I think that cross-pollination, either whether it's between industry or between IT professions, is really interesting. It helps you kind of become more of a well-rounded individual.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Okay, interesting. Let's talk a little bit about your role now then. So talk us through the process, I guess, in your experience of how you best implement a data culture. Because I appreciate it's not something that can be just come from one person, but obviously as a leader, it's the job of that leader is try and ingratiate everybody into that data culture. So how do you go about that? What's your secret?
Yeah. So interestingly, I've worked at a number of places where data culture has been a challenge. It's not unusual across any of people, any area where they're working in data at the moment. Culture is always a challenge. And I think historically, data has always been considered part of IT. And so it's very much about landing technology products. This application is in, we move on to the next program. And, data is a living thing. It has a life cycle and it requires skills. It's not necessarily about technology, it's about what you do with it. And it's about the enablement piece. And I had an interesting conversation about 2-3 years ago where I was told, Tia, we need a data culture. Data culture just means sort out processes and then we'll have one. And I was like, it's much, much wider than that. So for me, it's about the people, it's about processes, it's about what we do to skill them up. It's about how do we embed data into our day-to-day jobs. It's about driving that out. But we need to make that easy. So we've got to make the data accessible, but it's got to be safe, it's got to be secure. But we need to skill people up. It's not a skill that comes naturally to people. You can't just give them access to data and expect that they're going to be able to use it. That's a skill in itself, both in terms of the manipulation, but also having the wisdom to be able to understand what it's showing you and where you can use data safely and where perhaps the data is not suitable. Yeah. So I was having an interesting conversation at a conference yesterday about the idea of confidence levels within data. So some data needs to be really, really perfect. If you're looking to do, medical research, genetic mapping, something like that, you would want your data quality to be absolutely perfect. But in other cases, if you're just looking to find out how many widgets have you sold in Glasgow yesterday, Do you really care if it's 2 out, 3 out? You want something that's indicative in that space.
Yeah.
And giving an individual who's using that data the awareness to understand when they need perfect data quality and being able to differentiate between how good is good enough is all part of that culture stuff. Making sure your governance is embedded, making sure they know the rules of what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, and making sure that everyone's safe and able to do their jobs effectively with the data. Data platforms aren't just there to give you access; they're there for you to use. Your data is only really as good as how much you use it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's really interesting to say that. But how do you go about that journey of winning hearts and minds, sort of taking people on that journey with you, and I guess engaging with stakeholders, especially people that maybe are slightly reticent to it or don't necessarily see the immediate value of data? What sort of approaches do you take as a leader to try and change that?
Yeah, so you're always starting with what you want the strategy to be. Like ultimately, what are the big pain points that you're trying to address, and then work backwards from there. And if you can take a multi-work stream approach, I think that's useful. Not everything can be delivered immediately. So you have to figure out, well, actually, off the big programs I've got, alongside of it, I've got to be able to demonstrate some value early now. Yeah. And if you can cherry pick some small, easy deliverables that you can do, well, actually, you can start building that culture early in a small little hub, in a Vanguard site or a pilot site, whatever you want to call it. You give it a fancy, snazzy name, and drive it out from there. Take a small group of really enthusiastic people, put them in a room together and say, actually, this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to drive it out. Is that maybe you're doing it process by process, or maybe you're doing it product by product, but start small and begin to bring people in. I'm a big fan of the idea that taking some enthusiastic people to be able to scale an idea is really quite useful.
Yeah.
Enthusiasm is so infectious.
Yes.
If you have one person that's been co-opted from your team, go work in data for, half a morning a week, for example, and they go back with some fantastic ideas. They show everyone in their team and they're like, oh, that sounds really great. Let's go do that. And you can then begin to have that permeate quite naturally.
Yeah.
But alongside that, you then need some more structured approaches. So what can you do around large scale training plans, not just about tools, but around skills for governance, skills for, what are your data policies? What are those bits and pieces that need to be put in place around security? What is your governance structure? Who needs to sign stuff off? All those things that people need to know to be able to use the tools safely.
Yeah.
And that all needs dual training. So tech, but also the business stuff that goes with it. And that needs to run alongside, but it needs to be timed effectively so that when you're landing the technology, that learning is still fresh.
Yeah.
So, we're working at the moment to look at what our enablement plans are for a big transformation program that we're doing and trying to figure out the timings of when to start the training so that it is completed, ready for the platform. Trying to dovetail the two of those together. There's no point in delivering the training if they forget it all by the time the platform lands. You forget, you don't use stuff, you forget half of it within 2 days. And that's the statistics around this.
Right.
And within a month, you've forgotten it all.
Yeah.
So you need to
say the truth.
Training is, if you think about, back to the days when you were doing exams or anything like that, you did the initial cram and then you have to go back into your revision a couple of weeks later and then again and again until it sinks in. And that's because of these sort of memory degregations. And so when you're looking at embedding that training and making sure that people can remember and use how to use these tools, then you need to make sure that it's at the same time the platform's going to land and that they're going to have access to it. And, even getting the access ready and sorted out, that takes time. That's not an instant thing. That can take, a couple of weeks of, sat in someone's desk, John's on holiday, he hasn't had time to look at it. It's in his inbox. By the time they actually had their access sorted, they've forgotten it.
Yeah.
So you really have to think about when those timings come in together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I can imagine a lot to think about. Obviously, lots of places to spin simultaneously. But just going back to the point you made right at the beginning of that answer, what I really liked and what I found really refreshing is, as a leader, sort of understanding that it's about doing it through people. You know, it's sort of almost rather than do as I say because I'm the leader and, you know, this is how you do it. I totally agree with you. You know, it's getting other people bought in and passionate, and like you say, it is very infectious. It will permeate throughout, you know, more people.
And there are more structured ways that you can embed a data culture as well. You know, there's the carrot bit, which is all that incentive, you know, exciting stuff where you're, you know, bringing people along on the journey. But there is also the sort of stick side of things where you're, you know, putting in some more rigid stuff. You know, if you wanted to look at, say, driving your data quality, that's a big part of your culture. You can look to performance manage that and put it in people's objectives and say, actually, I expect you to have good data quality. And you can put some metrics in there and say, you know, at the end of the month, I only want to see you have 2% data quality issues across your piece, and performance manage them against that. I mean, it doesn't have to be, you know, as nasty as performance management can sometimes sound, but it gives them some idea of what your expectations are. Yeah. And you can structure that as well. So it's a little bit of both. You know, you do want some form and shape to what you're trying to deliver in your culture through the likes of, you know, those clear objectives. Yeah. But on the other side, you want it to be fun and engaging in something where it doesn't feel burdensome. Yes. And that is part of the innovation. So you need both together.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I guess there's obviously lots of different methodologies that you could employ. You know, we all know the likes of Agile and that kind of thing. And I think very often Agile is not widely adopted in lots of industries, especially bigger industries where there's huge data initiatives to execute. It's very difficult to do that. But where would you say Gallagher is in that sort of state of maturity that I kind of mentioned at the earlier part of the podcast on that sort of spectrum? Where would you say you are at the moment?
So I think insurers generally, you know, that whole as an industry are perhaps not as far ahead as, say, their banking counterparts. When we look at innovation and we look at that maturity model. I think that if we look at Agile, and it's certainly something we're adopting, so we have a number of key ways of working that we're moving to implement across Gallagher, one of which is Agile. There's another one around sort of data ops, using Azure DevOps as our sort of tool for that. Yeah. But there are other bits and pieces, you know, TOGAFs and so on and so forth around architecture and bits and pieces. But when I look at how they've operated in the past, it's been very waterfall. And as we transition into Agile, there's a definite shift in that mindset. So if you take a program plan across for funding, for example, in an Agile way, it's a lot more difficult to understand when it's definitely going to end because you haven't fully spec'd out all of the requirements you need to build. Yeah. So those time estimates aren't there. You're working with 2-week sprints. And so if you take that forward and someone goes, yeah, but when's the program going to end? That's a mind shift for them, and something we're working on, and you know, working to embed that and get people on additional training and so on and so forth. But there are areas of the business where actually that Agile methodology is already deeply embedded. So it's out there in our application development space, but now trying to scale that across the wider technology, of which data will be the next one to go through. We've already started some of that work. Is still a bit of an ambition. You know, we're scaling into that hopefully this side of summer. You know, that's kind of we're at the beginning stages of it, just kind of rolling that out.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think it's a very refreshing and pragmatic answer. That, you know, it's not one size fits all, and this is the methodology that's deployed across business, because, like I say, there's so many different variables to take into account when you're thinking about anything like that, especially when it comes to transformation, I guess, and taking something from A to B. So yeah, I can totally understand that. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about you as a leader. And I always ask this question because I think it's quite insightful to the individual. But what does being a leader mean to you, and what do you feel are some of the kind of most valuable traits that you can possess as a leader?
Yeah, I think in the data space, historically, people have, again, always thought around technology skills. When they think about their career planning, they're thinking about, well, I've got to learn Azure, or I've got to learn about Snowflake, or I've got to learn about, you know, whatever else it happens to be, whether it's Alteryx or it's, you know, it's ClickView or whatever it happens to be that week, DBT. And in reality, the skills that you needed for the last job are never the skills you need for the next job. And as I look at what the workload that I undertake now is compared to, say, 2 jobs ago, or 3 jobs ago, however far back we want to go, my role now is 90% around communication and doing basically internal sales and negotiations and that kind of stuff, and selling the vision. And probably about 10% of the other stuff is, kind of managing budgets and, the staff piece and that kind of stuff. There is, a big amount of strategy on that. But a lot of that, deep thinking around, like, what is the nitty gritty? How do we hook this all together? That's largely done by people who are sort of further down in the team, or architects and people who are doing more technical roles. Yeah. But actually at this level, I think I spend more of my time going out and engaging with the business, making sure we're aligned, we're answering the questions that they want answered, making sure that what we're delivering gives them value beyond just, here's another tool. It needs to be something that actually answers the right questions in a way that they want answered. And, as a leader, it's about, leading the charge a little bit. This is the vision, and sometimes the business doesn't know what they don't know. So you have to come up with ideas and go, these are the options. Which one do you like? Or maybe it's some recommendations from you going, well, this is the best option. This is the 3 bears Goldilocks scenario. And
I think that's called the alternative plays.
Yeah. and so sort of acting with a little bit of thought leadership there around where they should be going, or perhaps where the competitors are heading. Yeah. Sometimes that's a good place to benchmark. But also there's definitely an amount of kind of internal pastoral care that you need to give to your team around the coaching, around the mentoring, around showing them what good looks like, and helping them kind of move forward a little bit. And doing that piece as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And I totally agree with you there from the sort of softer skills point of view, and the role of it. I mean, I've seen the role of a CTO, CDO in my 15 years doing the job really evolve, really change, whereas it used to be historically maybe the strongest person technically, that had a little bit of, managerial and sort of softer skills. Whereas now I see, since the world everything's evolved more digitally, technology and data is becoming the beating heart of lots of businesses and driving businesses forward. And I think now more than ever, I see the most successful, leaders, data leaders and CTOs as people that have exceptional soft skills, really good at sort of, like I say, that sort of sales piece really, and sort of highlighting to people why we should be going on this journey, and making the board sort of understand that, and what are the ramifications if we don't do this as well. Like
and I think the bit that's quite often overlooked is the amount of alignment that needs to happen with the business. So if I think about the end-to-end data strategy, we've been through the point where we've gone from paper and we've moved to digital, and we've done a digital transformation, and then people kind of went, across the entire industry of everywhere. I've gone, well, what did a digital strategy give us? Well, it didn't quite give us what we wanted. We probably need to think about a data strategy and how we use data, where we need data, how we move it around the system. And then there's obviously the other bit around analytics and dashboarding and all that kind of other stuff. But there is the piece around end to end. What data do we need, and where do we want to put it? And to be able to do that, you need to understand the entirety of the business and all of the business processes, because otherwise you won't know which bits of data you want to collect. And that is foundational to any business strategy. And that part, I think, is often forgotten, that actually the IT department and in association with that data are often one of the few places across the entire business that know everything. They know all of your systems, they know all of your data. They need to understand all of your processes in a way that if you went to one particular team, they wouldn't necessarily know what happens in finance or in HR. They would know what happened in their bubble. Whereas in the data team, you're expected to know everything. It's a good place to kind of look to partner.
Yes. Yeah. I can understand that. Absolutely. You mentioned a little bit earlier on about, sort of pegging yourself against competitors in the marketplace, and obviously Gallagher, hugely reputable business, been around for over 100 years. Obviously, that many people in the company now, but do you kind of peg yourself against any particular competitors in sort of insurance landscape? Are there any kind of companies out there that you're sort of looking at thinking there's similarity or synergy, or actually, we could sort of maybe adopt a certain approach in the way they're doing it?
Yeah, so certainly we're always mindful. And so Gallagher is super ambitious in terms of where it sits in that sort of top rankings of insurers, both in terms of course of quality of service, but also size. I think we're now joint second or third largest insurance brokerage in the world. And there's been a huge amount of growth to get us there over the last few years. It's come inorganically, mostly through M&A, but there's also been large growth in actually our customer base. We are always kind of looking around going, what is everyone else doing? You want to be in front of them. We'd like to be a leading edge company. And that's part of the big transformation we're doing, is to make sure that we are in that space. Insurance is a small bubble. Like, people move from one insurer to the other. So we do know roughly what's kind of going on in those other spaces from a data and technology perspective. And actually, even within insurance, there are small kind of, I suppose, networking groups that happen across the CTOs or CDOs. And, whilst we're not in a position to share each other's company secrets, we get a general feel of what's happening in that space. And we're all quite often working on the same big programs to make sure we're making industry standards. So in that way, we come together. So we are always thinking about what are our competitors doing, because we don't want to stay in a stagnant position to keep advancing. Yeah,
absolutely. Very insightful. I mean, you strike me as somebody that's in a very digital world that we're all living in, sort of post-pandemic, and everything's kind of done over Zoom and Teams very often. You strike me as somebody that really goes the extra mile to go out there and actually attend events and conferences and sort of do that face-to-face interaction piece alongside others. So how important is that to you, and what sort of value do you get from that?
I think it is really important. I think it's important to be able to meet peers who are ultimately facing the same kind of challenges. Data is the same regardless of what industry you're working in. You're still using the same tools. Counting is still counting. You still come up with the same challenges. Yes, there are industry nuances, but being able to meet with peers and kind of get their learning and share some of that knowledge is really important. But I think there are other benefits to it. One is around getting the message out. What is your company doing? And I think in you work in recruitment, certainly the part that I find useful out of it is that it's so difficult to land good individuals in the data space. They're so few and far between. There are 10 times more jobs than there are candidates. And so having your message out in the public space begins to attract people into your company. And before I started doing a lot of the external networking and doing the conferences and sort of posting and having that, that sort of public brand, I guess. No one would ever message me and say, I want to come work for you. But now I have a constant stream of people who, hit you up on LinkedIn and go, do you have any jobs at the moment? I'd be interested in coming to work for you. Or can I have half an hour of your time? I'd like to know if you've got any posts coming up. And some of those are recruiters, as you'd expect, but some of them are actually individuals, direct contacts. And I think from that perspective, it's been really good to kind of get that message out there.
I could not agree with you more. I think, the world is massively evolving, massively changing, and recruitment, I think, as a result of that, is also massively evolving and changing. And I see it as my job now. Of course, yes, we will make money by placing candidates into roles, but I see for us to really partner with our clients, and sort of add fundamental value into what they're doing. A lot of the conversations we're having with them at the moment is actually around that, exactly what you said, that brand propositioning piece. And it's I'm not speaking out of turn, but you'd be amazed how many sort of quite senior people just don't get that bit about actually how it really makes a big difference in terms of talent attraction and talent acquisition, to kind of just be out there, and building up that brand, both as a personal brand for you as a leader, because like you say, people buy from people at the end of the day, and by virtue of you working at Gallagher will benefit from the fact you've built up a personal brand as well. So it's, and if you get it right, a really valuable kind of symbiotic relationship between the individual and the company. to get out there. And ultimately, I'm a big people person. Obviously, thankfully, working in recruitment, this is the right industry for me. But I just think you don't really fully get the true experience doing everything digitally, no matter what you're doing. And I think, everything in business ultimately boils down to people.
Yeah, it's all down to people and connections and kind of that network, particularly as you want to advance your career.
Yeah.
The bigger your network is, the easier that's going to be. And certainly, since starting a lot of that conference circuit and doing all of that kind of stuff, and I've done it for years, but not necessarily sort of spoken about it publicly.
Yeah.
But I think we're now, we're in a very social media savvy driven world where everyone has to have something out in the public space or you don't exist. And it's now sort of an expectation that as a technology leader, you have a platform and you use it and that is out there. But certainly beginning to be more open about it has led to a huge amount of other opportunities in the non-exec space and the advisory space. I do parliamentary work now, and it's all kind of exploded quite quickly. In a way that I would never really have thought that just posting a couple of conference updates on social media might do that. But it really does make a massive difference. And I've kind of, for the people that I mentor, they're like, I don't really want to do it. And I said, it will be, it will make a massive change to your career. And I read a statistic quite recently that only if you post once a week, you're already in the top 1% of people on LinkedIn. You're already like an influential voice. It's really easy to do because most people aren't doing it. They put their CV on there and then they leave it. But if you want to be seen as someone who has an opinion, who's influential in that industry, just post once a week.
Totally. It's simple, isn't it?
A week.
I mean, clearly you're a very credible and inspirational individual. So I'm not surprised you're getting a lot of attention and attracting a lot of inquiries. But in the same breath, you're right. It's just so many people, by virtue of the fact that so many people don't do it. If you just did do it, you would reap the benefits.
I think it's a very British thing, we don't like to sing our own praises and put yourself out there. But I think just nationally we will work out, a bit shy, and I don't quite fancy doing it, and quite humble. Most people, I think, are by nature. And so, it feels strange the first few times you do it, but you can kind of get into a rhythm. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Interesting. Okay, let's talk a little bit about sort of trends in the market, I guess, from a technical perspective, and sort of going back to what I was saying earlier about insurance being quite a traditional industry, and where we are today, especially in the data world, I guess, with the sort of gargantuan leaps forward that we've taken over the last couple of years with the rise of LLMs and Gen AI and that kind of thing. But what is it that you personally are most excited about, I guess, in the world of data today? What sort of excites you?
Yeah, so if I think about the entirety of my career in data, when we first started, tools were were incredibly expensive, and the breadth of what you could do with them was relatively limited. And that meant that your ambitions had to be quite limited as well. And I think now that, everyone across the entire industry, not just insurance, has decided cloud first, that sounds like a good idea. And APIs are so commonly available, like standard APIs where you just kind of out of the box. And so many of our tools are now cloud native, that they all play together in a very nice, easy to use way. That actually being able to plug some of that data stuff together is really, really easy. Stand up the tech stack is now much simpler than it would have been back then. And actually how you can get the data in is much easier. So that's a great start. But then when I look at some of the advances within those tools to actually make data more usable, to make it more accessible around low code, no code, in addition to, the hardcore engineers or data scientists who might have SQL or R skills or, Python or whatever it happens to be. There's still a space for those, but for those people who do data on the side of their desk, or maybe they work in finance or HR, they're pretty solid data skills, but they're not technologists in that sense. It now gives us the ability to give them access to the data in a safe way, in a usable way. and begin to sort of scale across a business instead of having a siloed data team.
Yes.
And I think that's really quite interesting and exciting.
Yeah.
But then when I look at, where we've gotten to when it comes to the AI and intelligent automation and RPA and all the other stuff that fits in that whole automation bucket, if I go back to when I started in Experian looking at decision analytics and fraud and predictive stuff, the leap forward in the last 2 years to move us away from, machine learning into sort of more generative AI stuff. And, the generative AI stuff's been around quite a while, but the last 12, 18 months, that step change from, GPT-3 came out and now 4 and it looks like, whatever.
Yeah.
That has been a real game changer. Like no one used to come to me and say, I'm interested in learning about AI. And they happen to work in, finance or they happen to work in HR. That was never a thing. But when your mum comes to you and goes, so AI, I had a play on a thing. And you're like, my mum can barely use a phone.
Yeah. And that was the light bulb moment for me, I think.
And
it got that level of adoption.
When your family suddenly understands that, with the work that you do because they've heard a buzzword, then you know that there's been a significant shift in the market.
Yeah.
A significant shift. Not just within industry, but outside of industry and people's perception of what data can do for them.
Yes.
Has been really quite exciting. And I'm looking forward to the next kind of 2-3 years and see where that takes us. There's certainly a question around how much of what generative AI can give us and how much of that is hype. And I think there's probably a certain amount of maturity. So we look at where it is now, like that is a lot of hype. But actually, where will it be in 2 years? Well, actually, that might be very, very different. That might begin to land some of those big ambitions that people have.
Yeah.
And, even internally within Gallagher, we've already started tinkering in the generative AI space. We've got our own internal GPT set up, safe, secure place, internal. And we're beginning to kind of build out some use cases for that where we can apply it and so on. But it's definitely a learning curve. There's so few people out in the market who have those skills unless you're willing to pay astronomical amounts of money.
Yeah.
I'm sure as a recruiter, you're seeing that there's people who want to find those skills, but so few of them that are actually out there in the market who have real experience. There's lots of people who said, I'm learning it myself. But that's very different to someone who goes, actually, I came from Google or I came from somewhere where they've actually been using it. And that's what we're finding.
Yeah, it's to your point, it's about adoption, isn't it? And I guess the maturing of the market, and it always will be. There'll be recruitment always is a supply-demand paradigm of one outstripping the other at various points. But I think as the, and AI is not going anywhere, right? Gen AI, I say, that's what scares me really. You think about technology and the internet's been around for like 40 years, and obviously how quickly the world has evolved in that time, but just literally this sort of like flash that's happened in the last sort of 12 months of like how exponentially, such a massive leap forward. I agree with you. I think in the next couple of years, it'll be amazing to see where we are because it feels like it is just going to become exponential now.
And I think you're right. Kind of using the internet as an example. I mean, I'm old enough to remember a time before the internet, like the time before you could go and it was, that you would have AOL and it was dancing cats, and that felt like innovation back then. You go to a page and that was it. It was just a picture of dancing cats. And if you think about how quickly that moved on to suddenly e-commerce and now being able to do streaming and all the rest of it, that was only 15, 20 years ago.
Bonkers,
and that change was quite rapid, moving away from there just being like, you had AOL and that was it to where we are now. I think the AI space will change massively in that sort of 5 year to make it quite a well-known thing that was widely adopted to then being something that's quite mature in the following 5-10 years afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to be and I think the AI ethics side of things is where it's going to become more and more into the fore now, because as the power is ultimately going to become more and more powerful, and but ultimately technology is still there to serve humans, I guess, at the end of the day, and there always will need to be that element of final human interaction at the end, just to sort of make sure it's verified findings and obviously the right kind of robust result. But that sort of interplay between at what point is human interaction required versus, you know, where it was historically to where I think we're going to be over the next couple of years, I think it's going to be astounding. And I think it's really going to draw upon a different set of skills for people to be successful moving forward, because now we've got that sort of base layer of logic and, you know, that, let's say that level of adoption globally, everyone has access to this now. I think it's really going to, and going back to the point we were making earlier about soft skills, I think really draw in the importance of, you know, creativity, empathy, just actually really being a good business person. I think moving forward will be actually more about being a person, if that makes sense, than it will about actually, I can solve this problem for you, because it's like, well, that can be solved quite automatically. And I think it almost will go sort of full 360 where we'll sort of appreciate being people again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I do wonder about the sort of future of data professionals' careers, because as we go into a world where low code and no code and needing no coding skills is more and more prevalent, because the tools are getting better and better and better. And if I look at generative AI code support tools, things like Code Whisperer and Copilot and so on, that you can plug into things and actually write code for you. How much of that work needs to be super technically skilled, and what does that data team look like in the future? And I think there is a big question around how do people modernize their skills to make sure they're learning the things that are out in the market. So you're already starting to see new roles, brand new roles that never existed 18 months ago. Prompt engineers, things like that. And figuring out, well, actually, if I want to future-proof my career, certainly not something people need to worry about today or tomorrow, but, you know, looking 5-7 years down the line, where are you going to go if you're a person whose job in its entirety is to write SQL or to, you know, code Python or whatever that happens to be? How are you going to keep up with the times? And I think people should be really mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. It's going to be a very interesting space to be in, isn't it? I think. But look, Tim, really enjoyed the chat today. I think it's been a fantastic conversation, really insightful, and covered quite a bit around in one episode. But I'd like to end each podcast in exactly the same way by asking if you'd be so kind to share your one favorite bit of advice that you've ever received, you know, throughout your career or your personal life. You know, what might that be for you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it happened very, very early on in my career. So when I think about, it was just my second, third job I took, this with a consultancy. And having come from an engineering background, like an aeronautical engineering background, I understood planes and all the rest of it. And then I'd come out and done an operations manager job, actually, before moving into technology.
Yeah.
And so I was relatively low on tech skills, but quite high on managerial skills. Right. So they put us through this sort of early career boot camp to learn all of the tools that we were going to be using. And I'll be honest, I struggled a little bit. And everyone else who was on this boot camp with me, a bunch of grads, they raced through everything, and they were like, and I did look around and go, this is tough for me, because I wasn't super technical in comparison. I hadn't had that hands-on experience for several years that they had. I come from management, and I did come out one day and I spoke to my line manager, and I was like, I'm not sure this is the job for me. And he says, well, why not? And I said, look at these guys. I said, they're racing away and I'm really struggling to get this, you know, little bit of the setup. We were doing some configuration stuff. And I said, I'm really struggling to get my head around it. And he said, why did you think that we hired you? And I went to do IT stuff. That's what you think when you're early in your career. You don't realize there's, you know, a variety of different skills that you bring to the table. You think of it very linearly. And I said to him, he was like, no, that's not why we hired you. We hired you because you had skills that other people didn't, like teaching people about tools, something we can do very quickly, teaching people soft skills, communication skills, present, how to, you know, work with someone like this, you know, have a natural conversation and figure out what they want. He said, that's the gap that we're really struggling to find in the market.
Interesting.
If anyone can take, you know, there's so many different career lines within technology. Maybe you want a business analyst. Maybe you want to be, software developer, maybe you want to work on IT help desk. There's so many different roles within that, and they all require slightly different skills, but all of them require people skills.
Yeah.
And the best advice I had very early on in my career was people skills, your soft skills are more important than anything else that you learn, because the technology skills will drop away as you advance up the tree.
Yeah.
You need to learn finance, you need to learn, all the other bits and pieces that go into managing stuff. So, if you're thinking about where you're going to take your career in 10 years' time, you're probably not going to be sat behind a computer coding, unless you want to be super technical.
Yeah.
Those soft skills are really where you're going to be leaning on quite heavily.
Yeah, brilliant. I think it really sort of reinforces the thread running throughout the whole of this podcast, really, and that piece around people skills and soft skills becoming more and more important, I think as time goes on. So fantastic. Well, thank you again for coming in. Really enjoyed it, and look forward to keeping abreast of your developments at Gallagher, and wish you all the very best for now and beyond.
No, thank you very much.